Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you happen to be watching and it is a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I'm really hoping that you're all excited for this specific book that we're going to be discussing for this very special must be read. There's a lot to really say about this specific piece of work. And it's also an appropriate time to bring this book to the forefront with our discussions here at That's Comical. As of now, I have Cami here with me to join the discussion. Cami, it's always a pleasure to have you.
It's always fun to be here. I'm excited for this discussion.
And we are going to have Shae. It's been a while since Shae has been making some videos over here, but she is going to be jumping into the conversation in just a little bit. We were hoping to get everybody here tonight, but we want to give a shout out to April because of the fact that she is living in the area that you're probably hearing about on the news. The plains are not really having the best of luck with weather. Thank goodness she and her family are doing okay, but she is doing the good work out there and helping her friends and neighbors in need with cleanup and getting things back to normal. And Andy was very excited to be here as well, but he's actually away at a dinner where they are honoring his father. So there's a lot of really nice things and not so nice things going on, but obligations are what they are, and they got to do what they got to do. So it's just going to be myself, Cami, and Shae tonight, God willing. And happy belated free comic book day to everybody. 2024. I hope that you all, if you went to your local comic stores, you got yourselves your books that you wanted. I'm also hoping that you all supported your local comic book stores that day and actually bought something. I sure as heck did. And it was very nice to actually get a little bit of extra geeking out going on because it is not always when Free Comic Book Day and Star Wars Day clash in one day. So that was definitely a lot of fun. It was really nice for me personally being at the comic book store and seeing a lot of people just flooding the store, talking about nerdy stuff, and more importantly, a lot of people, including myself, getting their Star Wars fare on and just having a blast. It was a really, really nice day, and it was such a good day to be there. But we also have to take into fact that tomorrow is Holocaust Remembrance Day. Very important day in the Hebrew calendar, as a matter of fact, because this is the Hebrew calendar's Holocaust Remembrance Day. For all of you who don't know, I actually am a Jewish person. I am the proud grandson of Holocaust survivors. So we call this specific day of remembrance the Yom HaShoah, which means the Day of Remembrance. So it is a very important day for somebody like myself. And we're going to be talking about probably one of the most recognized and most talked about graphic novels of all time. And that, of course, is Mouse, written by Art Spiegelman. Now, I just want to give a little bit of my own background in regard to this book, knowing that the story of the Holocaust or the stories of the Holocaust, because my goodness, I have heard so many stories from people who unfortunately were there and survived, thank goodness. But as somebody growing up in a Jewish home, it's something that is sort of part of your soul, part of your lexicon. It's something that you always know about. You always hear the stories. You always remind yourselves never to forget. And you also read and learn a lot about the Holocaust in many shapes and forms. And Mouse actually came out when I was in elementary school going into junior high school, because it came out in the early 90s. And in the early 90s, I was actually reading comic books. I picked up my first couple of X-Men and Spider-Man comic books at the time. And I did notice that there were a lot of kids in my school that were actually reading this book. And yes, I knew that it was a comic, but I never really tried to coincide the two because when I thought of comic books, I thought of superheroes. But now, as an adult in my early 40s, still reading comic books and still having a blast, I'm reading so many different kinds of stories in comic books. And it's not just about superheroes. And there are lots of different publishings that have basically announced that Mouse belongs in the lexicon of comic books and graphic novels, not just as something that stands out there on its own. So that's what I find so interesting about this book. And this is actually my second time reading it. And I will definitely say that my experience reading it this time was very different from the first one. I'll get into that a little bit later. But before we get into that, meaning the book itself, I thought it would be interesting to go into the artist himself, Art Spiegelman, and learn a little bit more about him. Because when you hear the name Art Spiegelman, most people say is, "Oh, Mouse." You know him for Mouse, but he's more than that. He had been doing things in the world of comics and popular culture way before Mouse was even created. I went to an art exhibit in New York City with my wife a few years ago, and I never would have imagined. And Cami, I gotta tell you, this blew my mind. Art Spiegelman is responsible for one of the greatest pieces of pop culture from the 1980s. People, if you don't know this, Art Spiegelman is not just known for Mouse. He's also the co-creator of Garbage Pail Kids. I mean, I want to also do a little bit of a lighthearted subject as well, just to show that Art Spiegelman is more than just a book about the Holocaust. But Cami, now that you know this after reading Mouse, how do you feel about something like that?
It's so interesting to go from the artwork that is within these pages to the Garbage Pail Kids, because this is something iconic, nostalgic that we grew up with. And, we can think of many characters from that line. And I am just blown away. It doesn't surprise me because the artwork is phenomenal. So to know his name is behind that is just really cool. But these are two vastly different categories, so it's really refreshing to see that he was able to do something a little bit more lighthearted, and something that obviously is going to be around for years to come, because I still see people posting cards and talking about the Garbage Pail Kids even today. So it's really cool that Art Spiegelman will be in a household name for many, many years to come for various reasons.
Again, Mouse is important. Mouse is iconic. But if you go into the world of popular culture and you're only known for one thing just because of the phenomenon that it is, I mean, case in point, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, they are working on other projects. As a matter of fact, Kevin Eastman is working on a brand new maxi series for Image right now. But Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, all you can ever think about is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So the fact that if they just died tomorrow, hopefully that's not the case,
Yeah.
but knowing that they will go down in history just because of one specific franchise and how successful and iconic it is, that's a great thing to leave with the world. So Art Spiegelman, if he was only known for Mouse, that's another great thing. But I want people to know that he is responsible for Garbage Pail Kids because people love Garbage Pail Kids, you know?
And it's such a blessing too when a creator is successful, like boisterously successful at something, and they're able to use the proceeds from that to make other art and dive into other projects, because then they don't become so heavy for that creator. It's like, I'm doing this now for fun, I'm doing this for me, because this amazing creation that I have given life to is so successful, and this will allow me to continue to be creative and to put other things out into the world. So I think it's really special when a creator gets a huge break like that and is able to then go out and make things that don't necessarily align with one another. They are in vastly different worlds, and it's something that we can enjoy, because I mean, as much as I love this story that we're going to discuss tonight, I am a huge Garbage Pail Kids fan, and they're nothing alike. So I think it's really cool to be able to have that.
And the fact that the reason why Mouse is here is because of the amount of pull that he had to make it happen. Because Mouse, when I first discovered it, I always remembered seeing it in these graphic novel sets or just regular books. I didn't know that this was originally a serialized story told in the pages of a magazine called Raw, which Art Spiegelman was the head editor for. And he pretty much helped build this, unfortunately, short lived entertainment and comics magazine. So, because of the fact that he had this place to put his ideas down into print, it's great to know that the success that he had gave him the opportunity to tell this story, and the rest is absolute history at this point.
And I'll be honest, this is something that I had seen many times working in a bookstore for many years. And it's something that I avoided because I thought it was something different. I thought, in a way, it was almost as if this was supposed to be a comedic piece because of the artwork. And this coming from someone who hadn't really delved into the world of comics just then, I was like, how do you make something as horrific as the Holocaust and the remembrance of the Holocaust into a cartoon? And I didn't even give it a second thought as to pick it up and to read it and look into it. I just thought it was, for really lack of any other word than disrespectful. I just thought, this is weird that someone would do this, not knowing also, and forgive me, I'm not very familiar with just looking at a name and knowing that's a Jewish surname, so I wouldn't have in any realm thought that Spiegelman would have been someone of Jewish descent. Furthermore, a child of a Holocaust survivor, so that's egg on my face, because I could have probably picked this up many years ago and had read it multiple times at this point, because having now read it for the first time in my life and as an adult, I think it hit me at the perfect time. But as someone who reads a ton of nonfiction about the Jewish studies and the Holocaust, this is something very special, and something now I'm very proud to say that I've read, and something that's in my collection, and something that I'm very disappointed that I did not pick up earlier and give it the credit that it deserves. So once again, I thank you for putting it in my path, because if it wasn't for you having mentioned it to me, I probably still would not have this in my home. And this is a true piece of art.
Well, that's one of the few things that surprised me, Cami. I mean, like, you and I have been friends for quite some time now, but I didn't know. I mean, I know that you were a history buff. I knew that, but I didn't know that you were very passionate about the Holocaust. I mean,
Mhm.
I just want to know, because one of the few reasons why I thought it would be wonderful to discuss this book. I mean, like I said, I wish that we could have everybody here tonight, just because of the fact that I am the only person who is actually Jewish in the team. I mean,
Yeah.
two of our That's Comical colleagues actually married into the Jewish faith. So I thought it would be very interesting to hear their takes. And even though these specific people, April and Andy, will not be here, they've already reached out to me and the rest of the team, saying how very much appreciative they were of taking the time to read this book, even though they were not going to be here, but they're going to say their pieces when the video officially gets posted. They've already announced that they're going to put some comments in there and whatnot. But I want to know, you of all people, like, what was it about this point in history that you were so interested in? Because there are so many people who don't want to hear about it. And I'm not saying that they're Holocaust deniers. I'm just saying that there are certain points in global history that are just so horrific. And unless you are somebody who is very, very close to these events, it's not necessarily something that shows interest in your mind. Not everybody who is not connected with Holocaust survivors want to know about it, because it's a very sad thing to talk about. It really is.
I'm fighting back tears as you're talking about it. I saw a documentary probably about 25 years ago on Auschwitz, and it forever changed my perception, my understanding. And even then, thinking now back to that point when it was exposed to me, I didn't even have a quarter of what I know now. You know, there was so much that wasn't said, there was so much that was held back. Um, and then in my quest for knowledge, my thirst for knowledge on this subject, it is obscure when you don't have Jewish faith that runs in your family, you don't know any Holocaust survivors personally. But another thing that for me solidified it was I walked through a Holocaust museum, and once again, it's like your soul connects to people that you don't know. And when that happens, it forever changes who you are because you want to know their stories, you want to know their names, you want to speak life into their memories, you know, even though you don't know them. You know, for most of those individuals who went through that, they are just a number because they didn't make it out, you know. So it's just for me, it's heart wrenching. It's mind boggling to know that humans could do this to other humans. That there is such evil that exists in the world that something like this has become part of our history books, and it just infuriates me when people don't want to talk about it, when people want to erase it from history and want to remove it from our history books and our educational journeys in school and stuff. It's just, to me, it's these are the things, these are the events that shape us as humans. And if you can't find a way to connect to something like this, your where's your heart, you know? And that's really for me what it's always been. This has always just been um, extremely difficult to face, extremely difficult to read. But I end up loving these people that share their stories because they are true survivors. They are the true strength of what it is to be human and to make it out. But there isn't a movie or an adaptation or a documentary or a nonfiction book that I still pick up to this day that I don't shed a tear, you know, even though I don't know these people. It's just extremely hard to read. Even there was even a point in this story that I had never experienced anywhere else. And it's amazing to have been reading it this entire time. And there's a pictorial of a Nazi picking up a child and by its legs and slamming it against a wall. Couldn't have been more than 2 or 3, and it's like, "Oh my god," like, I stopped reading for a moment, got viciously nauseous, and I just it broke my heart all over again, you know?
Yeah. And what's very interesting is, as dark of a thing as the Holocaust is, it's also really amazing to know that that was one of the biggest inspirations for modern comics. Because when you take a look at people like Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster, they created Superman in a world that was very dark, and they wanted to give the young children a little bit of hope. And a lot of other creations like the Spectre is very much linked to Jewish mythology. And I just found this out. You were talking about earlier about you hear a name and you would not know if it was Jewish or not. Well, I just found out the other day that Chris Claremont, his mom is Jewish, and he classifies himself as a fully Jewish man. And it makes so much sense because who are Professor Charles Xavier and Eric Langshire, aka Magneto? Two Jewish people that lived completely different lives. One was a survivor in Auschwitz, and one happened to be someone who was fortunately to be raised in America during this time. So there's and then you think about Jack Kirby, who was born and raised in America, but very well understood that there were brothers and sisters of his that were suffering over in Europe. So what did he do? Well, he created Captain America. So the fact that a lot of the godfathers and yes, and godmothers, that most of the people who gave us the modern comics were actually Jewish people. It's amazing that something so dark as the Holocaust can inspire fight and hope for good and justice in the world. So once
I don't
again, Mouse, while it came out decades later, it still shows us such an impact and that important stories can be made based on these horrific times.
I don't think people realize how much the entertainment industry is Jewish. I think that if people really stop to um, do their research into what writers and directors and actors of yesteryear and today, there is so much Jewish influence. But I think that once again, we have put this well, and I say we, but they have chosen to do that, where they've changed their names, and we don't know their surnames until it comes out in an autobiography years later, or someone else chooses to tell their story or share something. There's a wonderful Instagram page called Jewish Facts Daily that I absolutely love to follow, because I learned so much about Jewish history. And so much of that is the entertainers and the actors and the writers that are laced through Hollywood and have been since the dawn of time. And we have no idea that these individuals come from very dark backgrounds, and some of them are immigrants, and it's really interesting to hear that side of the story. And so yeah, I think it's incredible to be able to take something from a very dark place and make something timeless that we love and cherish today.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, I'll just mention a name to you. Isser Danielovich. Do you know who that is?
I'm sure it's someone I love, because I know like Gene Wilder is Jewish.
Well, do you know who that was?
Was it him?
That person changed his name to Kirk Douglas.
Kirk, see, that's what I'm saying. See, there's some amazing actors and actresses that are of Jewish descent, and they've changed their names, and we love them for someone else. They're someone else to us, so that's super cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I actually just got a message, and guys, I'm very happy to say that Shae is on the way.
Yay.
So she couldn't be starting at a better time. But yeah, and there she is. So let's just get the volume going and we'll continue on the discussion.
Yeah, now that I've had the waterworks today.
Well, that was like I said, I wanted to try and start it off in a different way. Hi, Shae, how are you?
Hi, Shae,
Hi,
welcome.
Just
I'm so
want to
sorry I'm
say,
late.
first of all, let me say you didn't miss anything because
Okay, good.
we were actually just trying to do a little bit of lighthearted stuff and just talk a little bit about backgrounds and whatnot. So I'll just let you know we actually told the audience that Art Spiegelman, while he's known for Mouse, not that many people know that he's also the co-founder of Garbage Pail Kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so once again, Shae, I want to thank you for being able to join. I know that we wish that we could get everybody together for this one, but I feel that we're going to have a good show regardless. I mean, we're already having a good show, but you and Cammie, I think, are going to be more than enough because I know you guys have so many things to say.
This was
Yeah,
a heavy
so
one for sure.
yeah. So let's just get into the story. So Mouse basically is the actual true story of the creator of the book, Art Spiegelman himself, talking to his father, Vladek, a Holocaust survivor, about his experience in the Holocaust, saying that he wants to do a comic about the Holocaust, something that is definitely bold, definitely something that has never been done before, because Cammie was telling us that she found it a very strange thing to see a Holocaust story being told in comic form, and like, how do you do this? That's basically what it is. But I guess before we get into the meat and potatoes of the story, I guess, Shae, since you're still just came in, so Mouse, I would like to know what your experience is. Is this something that you just read for the first time? Is this something that you have known about for many, many years? Like, what is your story about getting into this book for today's recording?
So this is my first time that I've ever read Mouse, but I have a lot of friends who teach high school and have used it as curriculum in the past to help teach the Holocaust. I work as a bookseller at Barnes and Noble, if you're unfamiliar. So obviously this is something that's been in my purview for a very long time, especially last year once it got banned. And I always wondered why. Why is this banned? It was used as curriculum in schools. Why? And so now that I've read it, I have a better understanding as to both sides of the story. I understand using it as a teaching tool in a school, and I also understand why some people would feel like it should be banned. Like I can see both sides of it now that I've read it. I don't know where I land on the issue anymore, if I'm honest, because I see vividly both sides of it. So it's one of those things where with this being my first exposure to it, I think if I read it a second time, I might be able to like finalize where I land on that situation, but where I've only read it the once, it's hard to say right now.
Okay, well, it's funny that you mentioned the whole thing about the book being banned because ironically today I actually watched a YouTube video that actually was a CNN interview with Art Spiegelman himself. And I was listening to specifically the manifesto that was announced in the school district in Tennessee, where this whole recent event of the banning of the book started. I personally can understand certain aspects of it if it's going to be given to children who are not in junior high school. The graphic imagery, yes, there is a little bit of foul language in there. So if you're going in that perspective, I personally, I get it. But the other part is, you know, when Art Spiegelman was being asked, it's like, okay, I can see that, but are there any other intentions that these people are not sharing? Like, is this their real reason for wanting to ban the book, or do they not want the kids to know about the Holocaust? I mean, I was saying to Cami earlier that this book literally came out when I was in middle school in its full bind up graphic novel form. I didn't read it. I actually first read it when I was in college in a literature of Holocaust class. So it took me a very long time to read it when personally I feel I should have read it many, many years before. But that's if that is the only reasons why they don't want young children reading it, I would get it. But if they were banning it in a middle school, I would start thinking about that because I feel that 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds do have a certain level of maturity at that age. And knowing about the fact that the Holocaust is a part of history, I feel that it would be appropriate for an age group like that, if anything. I mean, in my world, being from Jewish upbringing, this is a book that young kids do read. But there's an understanding as to why the parents are giving this book to their kids. So I think the right word that Cami used a little earlier before you got here, Shae, was outsiders don't have that mindset, meaning people who don't have close connections to people who lived through this event.
And I honestly think that was one of the most eye-opening things about this story of the Holocaust is that this is about someone who lived it. And you could kind of see how he was older and his mind was starting to go because he would jump back and forth as he was talking to Art about this clearly. And clearly Art just like had a recorder going and then he just kind of sketched things as he went. You could tell from the way the story went. And it was really just that is not what my experience with the Holocaust has ever been. Most of my experience with the Holocaust has either been self-taught by like books I've sought out on my own or in a classroom taught by very conservative people who only told me the bare minimums. So having something like this as a teaching tool in conservative Utah where I live made a lot of sense to me because it gives the kids a more accurate look at what life after the Holocaust looks like for a lot of Jewish people. And I thought that was brilliantly done. And this definitely reads like a graphic memoir more than you know, some sort of political piece on the Holocaust.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
if people are looking at it that way, they're looking at it the wrong way. This is clearly meant to be a graphic memoir. And I think the way Art Spiegelman did it really is brilliant in so many ways. I mean, I could go on for a while about that, obviously,
Well, we
but
have some time, so feel free when you're able to.
exactly. So it's one of those things where it's still, because it's in a graphic format, it's more palatable than if you were just sitting reading the words. If you were sitting reading the words, you wouldn't absorb it in the same way. And even though he used, something like a mouse, like a mouse figure to kind of talk about the fact, like to make it more graphic, I guess you could say, like more of a comic rather than just using people's faces. That's kind of what gave it an in at the time, I think. It made it a little easier to kind of get past some of the initial, "Oh, it's about the Holocaust. I don't want anybody touching it." It got more people to pick it up because of that. They're like, "Oh, well, what's this about? Why is there a mouse and a swastika? I am curious." And it's just such an interesting way of telling this story. And it's very Art Spiegelman. Like, if you've read anything else by Art Spiegelman, like, it just makes sense.
Well, I think the key word that you said, Shay, is palatable. And yes,
Mhm.
it's hard to talk about a Holocaust story being palatable, but I'll use a comic term for this now that you've actually just said that. If you're a young person and you want to learn about the Holocaust, or if you're just someone that doesn't know a thing about the Holocaust, this is what we would prefer to call a very good jumping on point. If you had to choose between Art Spiegelman's Mouse and Schindler's List, directed by Steven Spielberg, to
Oh gosh,
get
mouse all
your
day long
first
every
story
day.
on Holocaust, you go to Mouse. You go to Mouse. It's really difficult for me to say some of these types of things, just knowing who I am and where my heritage is from. But
Right.
it's as someone who has learned about the Holocaust ever since the first time I ever learned about the Holocaust, I was 8. I was taught it in 3rd grade because I went to a private Jewish school and we had to learn about it. So that was when I first heard about a man named Hitler and concentration camps and ghettos and places like Germany and Poland and all of this stuff. So that was when I first got exposed to it. And Mouse wasn't even there yet. That's what's even more interesting. Mouse didn't come out in full publication until like 1992. So this was before 1992, which is crazy.
I
But
was just trying to think my first exposure to anything related to World War II in school. Like, I think it was in elementary, but I think I was upper elementary, more like 5th grade, 6th grade.
I learned about the Holocaust before I learned about the Battle of Normandy. So,
See, I didn't learn much about the Holocaust really till junior high
yeah.
because, in conservative Utah schools, they sanitize a lot of things.
Right.
I'm just trying to imagine being 8 years old and being exposed to that for the first time. I
It's
can think
weird.
back to when I was 8 and what I was doing, and I don't know that my brain would have been able to fully comprehend what was being taught to me. So I commend, your educational journey and those that taught you, because it's such a delicate subject, and to teach such a delicate being. I told you I cried in book 2 because of, what I was exposed to with that. So to know that, children are learning about it at 8, that's intense.
I actually can even remember what I did the day I learned all that stuff and went home. I actually went to my mother and asked her questions like, do we have any Holocaust survivors in the family? And then I started like asking, well, I was like saying, like, did this happen to them? Did they ever actually have to go to these places? And as I got older, I started learning more from my relatives, and I was going to museums. I've been to Yad Vashem in Israel. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Manhattan. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And it's such an interesting thing because it's like, you know, I've learned so much about this over and over and over again. And yet people will like ask me like, why do you keep going back? Like, it's like a horrible thing to think about. It's like, why do you keep going back to these places to remind yourself? I said, because we have to. That's just what I keep saying. We have to. I mean,
Someone has to,
yeah,
because this is a piece of our history. And though it's a brutal and ugly piece of our history, it is part of our history. And we continue to remind ourselves of these things so that we don't do something similar in the future. Granted, there are some people out there who I feel like are making similar decisions, and I have all sorts of feelings about that, but that's not what we're here to talk about today.
no,
So I will keep them to myself for now.
no
But
problem.
it's one of those things where this is a piece of our history that should never be repeated. And I don't think it will to this extent ever again, because we continue to learn and teach about this piece of our history. And I think Art Spiegelman taking his dad's story and giving it to us the way he did reaches so many more people than just what you learn in school.
Right. And
And
yeah, I,
being an outsider as well, I am not Jewish. I was raised very conservative Mormon, but we have our own trials in in our religious history. It's not anywhere near what you guys went through, and I will never say it was. But living through persecution and people, accusing you of awful things that you clearly have never done or never were part of is part of that part of our religious history as well. And so just to know that it continues to happen to various religions in various forms is awful. Like, religion is religion. Believe what you believe. It doesn't matter to me. It shouldn't matter to you what other people believe. It's their beliefs. Like, it should never matter. This should
be a
never
good
have happened because
person.
it doesn't matter.
Just be a good person. That's all we ever ask of
Exactly.
anybody.
If you're
But
a good human to other people, they'll be a good human to you. That is the philosophy I live my life by.
and I think that's the reason why Mouse connects with so many people, because this could have easily been like a straight up history lesson on the Holocaust. And it's not. It's a story, and it's being told by one man, and he's basically just giving you the whole experience that he went through. Like, they could have easily talked about the Nuremberg laws. We could have heard about Kristallnacht, aka the Night of the Broken Glass, but we didn't, because this was not Vladek Spiegelman's story. He specifically talked about everything that happened before the wars really hit him in Poland. We talked about him meeting his wife, how
Oh
he
my
had,
gosh, their reunion, I cried so freaking hard.
yeah, this is just
I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is amazing.
I mean, the whole fact that this was a person that lived a, an honest life, had a large circle of friends, as Cami was saying to you before the recording, a man who not only tried to create a deep relationship with his wife, but tried to even build a strong relationship with her family. And the fact that when the war finally made it to Poland, the amount of trials and tribulations. And I think the one thing, especially the second time around, that really hit me the most, and it's not just with non-Jew versus Jew, but it was even Jew with Jew, it was the backstabbing and the betrayal, all because of the fact that they just wanted to survive. And that is where you see the true darkness of human nature. I mean, that's another thing that I also really did appreciate. The book is not just when the Nazis invade, you see them doing all these horrible things. It's about what are the people who are actually being persecuted doing? What are the townspeople doing? Because to a certain degree, they were technically prisoners of war too, because they knew that if they didn't do what the Nazis said, they were going to get killed and possibly thrown into concentration camps too. These were Frenchmen, Polish people, German people. Like, they knew what they were doing was not right, but they had to do it to survive. And that's another reason why I felt that this story was absolutely perfect, because it's a story of human nature and survival. That's what it is.
And
Well,
exactly,
and I've
it's
seen many times on documentaries too, where they'll interview Nazis, and those soldiers had really no idea what they were in for, what they were signing up for. And, you know, granted, I'm not speaking for all of them, but there were a few that genuinely felt bad, but knew it was either them or me. You know, I was given an assignment, I was in a military position, I had a job to do, and I did what I was asked to do. I didn't ask questions. I had a family to feed. I had to go home to them at the end of the night. And no, it wasn't the easiest thing for me to do, but I went home and I slept in my bed, and that was my goal for that day. And you can't fault them. You can be angry, you can be mad, you can be all kinds of things, but to be in that position, it's like, what decision would you make? You know, what would you do if you were said person? And you see Jews against Jews in this book. You see people give people up. You see people just for the sake of hope that they might survive another day or another week, or it might give something to their family, you know? So it is, unfortunately, the survival of the fittest out there. Human nature at its very core, we would like to think is kind, but it's not. It is genuinely awful. And you know, not to get too religious, because this isn't what we're here for, and we're all from different religious backgrounds, which I think is absolutely amazing, because I've talked to you both individually about religion, and actually that's one of the reasons I absolutely fell in love with Shae, because she's just an amazing human being to her
There's a
core.
lot of wonderful diversity in this room tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
Th-
Believe it or not.
but no, but Shae is just, you know, and this is no qualms about you, Steve. You know, I sing your praises all the time, but Shae is just a beautiful human being to her core. And the way that the way that she can really bring a room together, I get emotional because I've had a moment with Shae before where she took me from a dark place that I was in, and she made it okay. And I will forever be grateful for that.
Well, that's
Um,
why I have her here on the team. 'Cause I know she's a good person.
no, but she's a really beautiful soul. And I think that sometimes we get caught up as human beings in the way we're brought up and the things that we talk about, and given the society that we live in today, we're 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 living in fear to be who we are, and to be proud of our upbringing, or to be proud of what we stand for, when at the heart of it, you know, the people that I like to surround myself with are very kind-hearted people. And I think the older I get and the smaller my circle becomes, the more I'm ridiculed for being very vocal about wanting people like that in my life. But I realize how precious life is and how short our days are. And why am I going to surround myself with people who are angry all the time and just want to ensue these hateful rhetorics, whether it be on their social platforms or in their day-to-day conversations? Like, I, at some point in my life, really wanted to connect with those people in hopes that something I said might resonate with them, or might change their heart in some way. But I've come to learn as an adult that people are people, and no matter how you connect with them, whatever brought you together in life isn't necessarily what's going to bond you. You know, I there's some people that I really genuinely adore out there for various number of reasons, but as we've kind of entered into this dark climate over the last, I would say, about 4 or 5 years, I've seen some really ugly sides of people that I absolutely adored. And it's really hard for me to want to be a part of their bubble because some of the things that they post in their stories or some of the things that they put on their platforms are hurtful to me. And then if I speak on it, it's like, God forbid I should say something that was hurtful to me or something that didn't resonate with my soul, because then I'm just wrong. You know, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't these days. But I just feel that, you know, stories like this are personal, and it's important for us to appreciate them for what they are, because there are so many stories like this of Holocaust survivors out there. If you just take the time to search them out, there's thousands of people that have told their story over time, and they're all just as heartwarming and heartbreaking all in the same breath. This story I thought was really beautiful too, because Art gave the voice to his father that was genuine and true. He didn't try to English eyes his lingo. He didn't try to, you know, tweak it so that it was good enough for us Americans to absorb. It was broken English, and I loved it because when you listen to a Holocaust survivor or just someone of, you know, that lived in those times in that area, Polish and Hungary and all of these places, that's how they speak, you know?
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful and refreshing to not get a tailored version of that. This was raw, this was beautiful, it was heartbreaking and heartwarming all in the same. But I will say that it did break my heart that Art and his father never came together the way I had hoped. Because I guess in a way I was always rooting for Vladlik. I was always hoping that he would get the bond with his son. And I think for him, he just wanted to go back to the early days of Poland where all the family was under one roof and he knew everyone was safe and everyone was protected. And I think that's why his soul was at an unrested point for most of his life, because he no longer had his wife. He had this subversion of a wife now that he never truly loved. And I mean, she did try to love him the best way that she could, but
Yeah.
that bond was very broken. And
But
I
they were
just
also
feel,
two very broken souls trying to come together,
oh,
which
Yeah,
made that.
absolutely. And that is
Mala
a
was
whole
never a
story all
bad
its own.
person in the story for
No.
me.
When, when,
I felt really bad for her too. I mean, it's so funny that you're talking about that, Cami, because when I read this book the first time around, my main focus was on Vladek's story. But reading it a second time, I was amazed by how much more interested I got into the time where we see Art and his father in the modern day, and just it's very interesting to see how something like the Holocaust affected people. I mean, I will say that my grandparents, and maybe that's just because of the fact that they were fortunate enough, meaning my dad's parents, they were fortunate to get out of Germany early. Like they got out before the concentration camps and the ghettos and all of that stuff. So they were lucky. So I can understand how when I take a look at them, reminding myself of them over the last, I was fortunate to have my grandparents in my life for just a little over 20, 25 years. My grandmother longer than my grandfather, but they loved life. They were very much happy people, but at the same time, they knew people who didn't get so lucky. And unfortunately, I know that my grandfather lost his parents because they got their kids out and they stayed behind. And I remember when I was 13, how my dad told me a story about how my grandfather, who fought for America in the army during World War II, and when they officially won, he went back to his old neighborhood and basically knocked on the doors of all his old neighbors. And some of these people didn't even want to see his face again. He's like, "Where are my parents?" Like he literally was ready to kill people to find out where his parents went. And finally, he found out that they unfortunately didn't make it. So it was sad to hear stories like that. But yet, yet my grandparents stayed very much fruitful and happy and proud to be in America. And they lived the last years of their lives in Israel, which was my grandfather's dream. And they had a wonderful family. I mean, my father's one of the best people that I know. And it's also, as a father myself now, my daughter is about to turn 2 in 5 days. It is crazy. And I look at this child, and she is the sweetest, kindest thing in the world. And I look at her and sometimes by myself, like when I take her for a walk, I'm just like saying to myself, I wonder how you're gonna feel when you learn about the world and the history of Judaism, and you learn about how many people throughout thousands of years just hate us because of what we are. It's a sad thing to think about, but eventually she's going to learn. All I want her to be is don't be angry about the past, remember it, but be proud of what you are and be proud that you're here. That's all I just want my daughter to be, because I was raised observant and I followed a lot of the traditions. I still do to a certain extent, but I'm just not as religious as I used to be. So I don't want what I learned to get lost. I want my daughter to know about all this stuff, and I want her to be proud of what she is. She doesn't have to follow the religion by the book, but I want her to be happy about being a Jewish woman. That's all I want.
And I think that's really been the scream and the cries of our society for the last, 4 or 5 years now, is that everybody wants to be seen and heard, but for who they are, and to be true to themselves and to be accepted. And I think the hardest thing for us to try to do as a society is be tolerant and accepted of other people and their religions and their lifestyles and their choices and their decisions. However, we're going about this in a very erratic and violent manner. I mean, we had Shay had touched on it earlier, where be whatever religion you want, and it's no harm, no foul on me. It's your choice, it's your decision. And I think that we need to have that same mindset for every facet of a person's existence. However, also on that note, be who you are, be proud of who you are, but don't be disrespectful to someone else because they might disagree with you. If it's not my cup of tea, or it's not something that I understand, give me the patience and the grace to learn about it in my own time. And if it's something that I maybe choose not to do, then don't fault me for it. There are tons of people, like I said, that I love for various reasons, but there's a lot of facets of them that I don't. And that's okay. That doesn't make them a bad person. It just means that maybe they're not my people. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean it's maybe not someone I would hang out with in my off time, but I can certainly love them from a social perspective, or from, their channel, or from their page or something like that, and appreciate where I can connect with them. But we probably won't be best friends in the off time, and that's okay, because just as they're not my people, I'm probably not theirs either. It really breaks my heart how people treat people. And I'm sure we could go back, obviously, since the dawn of humanity, and feel this way, that we've probably been arguing about things that make us different from each other. Um, and maybe I'm just more cognizant because I read things like this, or because I am a social presence, or I have social platforms where I connect with other people that I don't know. I mean, let's be honest, with most people that we follow or friend or all of these things, they're strangers to us, and we assume that the facade that they put online, that presence that they share with us, is who they are. And we oftentimes find that that's not the case, and when we do, it's very jarring. It's kind of like a lie. So many people are living a lie online, and it's really hard when you meet those people in person to realize you're not who I thought you were. But then when you do meet someone who's incredible, and then some, Miss Shae, it's heartwarming. It really is, because it's like good people do exist, and it gives you hope for the future.
Yeah, I also think what I really actually liked a lot about the book was I love the opening, because it really like gets you in there from the get-go. And I just love the fact that it starts off with Art as a child, and he falls off his bicycle, and his friends just go on without him, and his father comes to get him, and he says, why? He's like, Art, why are you crying? And he says, my friends just left without me because I was too slow. And he's like, really, you still call them your friends? Like, I was like, wow, that's pretty powerful. But
Yeah, I'm the kind of
yeah.
person that kind of has the opposite experience, where I hang on to my friends too long in a lot of ways too, where to a point where it was at the detriment to myself, I learned later in life. Like there was a particular friend, we'd been friends for a very long time. In a lot of ways, I considered her more like a sister than just a friend because we were that close for a long time. But then I got looking at our relationship over the period of years, and I realized that I had given this person so much of myself and so much time and so much energy. And then I looked at, I hate to say the balance, but that's kind of the only way I can phrase it easily. I looked at the balance of our relationship and it was very skewed in her favor, where other than some companionship, I really wasn't getting much back in the ways of the friendship. Like she wasn't there for me when I needed her. She wasn't a safe place for me to talk because it would always spin around and become about her. And I hated that it was that way, but it got to a point where I actually had to cut off this particular
Yeah.
friendship because it was toxic to me and draining me. And that's the kind of person I am. I'm always that person who gives of myself to people. It's part of why I'm myself when I'm online. I just want to give myself to people. I don't have kids. I'm not going to be able to have kids. And so this is a little way of sharing myself for people and for whoever and to, I don't know, maybe not be forgotten when I'm gone.
Trust me, we won't forget you, Shae. It's impossible.
But there, you know, you'll probably go similar in time to me since we're similar in age. So after that, who's
I
gonna
love
think of me?
have you ever heard have you ever heard the thing have you ever heard the joke why does the Jewish husband always die before the Jewish wife?
Mm-mm.
Because he wants to. That's something that that's a joke I heard a long time ago.
Yeah.
But other than that, so yeah, I mean, another thing that I also really like about the book is Art's wise decisions of which animals he chooses
Hmm.
to depict each individual group of people. Though I would definitely say that there could be some people that would be offended about it, particularly the French person, because we all know that that specific animal depiction doesn't really sit well with French people. But to a certain degree, I could understand why. But I personally I think the thing that really surprised me the most was, and even though it is so freaking obvious, the fact that the Germans were depicted as cats. That's the one thing that I found was because, like, they could have
Yeah, the
been
cat and
wiener
mouse
dogs
game.
for all we
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
But it made so much more sense. And I also personally felt that art depicting the Jewish people as mice was also a very bold thing because throughout history, Jews have been referred to as rats. So
think it was intentional though. I
yeah, I
I
honestly
think so as
do.
agree.
well.
I
I,
agree.
I think
But
he was very intentional in his choices.
yes, and I feel that because of the fact that he decided let's make them mice because there's a little something different when you think about a mouse compared to a rat. Because like when you think about mouse, you
Thank
sometimes
you.
we'll think about the little critter that's invading your house, but you think of Mickey Mouse, you think of Jerry from Tom and Jerry, you think of all those mice characters that are fun to watch
Mighty
and
Mouse.
warm-hearted. You know, Mickey Mouse, I love Mickey Mouse. But yes, absolutely, biker mice from Mars. But when you think of mice, you don't necessarily think of something that is scary or something like that. Maybe if you're an elephant, you think otherwise, but we're obviously not elephants here. But no, it's just there's so many little nuances in the book that just in keep you wanting to read on, and you just find tiny little inklings of brilliance all throughout the book as you're reading it. And also, what I find so interesting about the artwork is it's simple yet complex. Like, if as someone who does have a teensy bit of artistic talent, if I were to try and create a replicate a panel from Mouse, specifically the characters, I could probably do it because they just do look so simple to draw. But when you take a look at the illustrations as a whole with the backgrounds as well as the atmosphere, because that's the other thing, the whole scenery, the set pieces, they really add so much to the atmosphere with some simple drawn characters like what you see. And like the shading is very dark at certain points, it's very black. That's also
Yeah,
what's
like
very interesting about it.
if you need an example of the art, there you go. I've got it right here. So
Yep. Yeah, it's very, it looks so simple, but there's so much depth to every panel. And that's what I
mhm.
find so brilliant because,
Well, like in the editions they have these flaps that just have all of
yep,
that
yep,
to
those are the
depict the
ones that I
darkness.
have as well, actually.
Hmm.
But as somebody who is a comic book reader, and I can mention like some incredible artists, whether it's from the golden age of comics or the modern age of comics, it's just interesting. Maybe not interesting is not the right word, but it's definitely exciting to see artwork like this being amongst all of these other people who have just most likely been known to just draw superheroes. The fact that if you've never actually read Mouse, but if you see an image of Mouse, you'll know exactly what it is the minute you see it, because Mouse is a name of a book that is very much a pop culture phenomenon. People know what it is, even if they haven't read it. But when they'll see those images, they'll know exactly where it's from. And that's why this book is as iconic as it is. It's not just about the fact that the story is about the Holocaust. There's so much more to just telling a story about the Holocaust in the pages of this book.
There was an author one time that I had heard, well, read, that made a comment about someone making a comment of their work and, putting it out there in the universe and being very critical of it and saying, well, anybody can write a book. And the author shot back and said, well, yeah, if anybody could do it, then everybody would be doing it. And so, based on the comment that you just made, yeah, we look at things that look very simplistic, but there is so much that goes on behind the scenes in the creation of things like this. And even talking about the characters that he chose, when you get into book 2 and he's having the conversation with his wife about how to depict her and what type of character she should be, and she's
Yeah,
like, well, I'm married to you, so of course I should be a mouse. That's just duh, matter of fact. But he touches on the fact, well, but you're French, so it's not the same. So
I remember
I
that.
just I thought that was super sweet, but then also, how she goes on to say, "Well, I converted for your father, so the least you could do is make me a mouse," you know. But it's just little things like that that really bring lightheartedness to very dark content. And one of the other things that I very much appreciated about this story was when Art chooses to go to therapy and he's talking to the therapist and just how spot on he gets. And he does say something, very critical about maybe we just need a bigger, newer Holocaust. And that really tugged at my heartstrings because of everything that we've endured in our generation just in the last few years, and just how we've seen people go from super chill and kind of kumbaya to just absolutely division of the masses, and it's this or that, it's my side or your side. And it's just to know that that possibly could be the mindset inside some people is just very true to kind of circling back what we said earlier. The nature of people at their core, we hope, is kindness. We hope is the spreading of love and joy, and wishing that other people have that same joy and hope and prosperity and success in their life. But really, we know differently. We live in a world, and that's kind of what I was alluding to, but I really got off course and got emotional on you guys, is that we want what's best for each other, and at our very core, we want to see that camaraderie. But by nature, we live in a world that is very black and white, very good and evil. And as human beings, we choose sides every day and we choose the path that we want to take. And so that's really what I was alluding to earlier, is that not to get religious, but that good and evil balance exists within us all. And when you become part of a social construct and really we live in it, we're in a world of on the verge of becoming artificial ourselves, and that's very scary.
Yeah.
Knowing that we could be duplicated and we wouldn't matter as humans anymore, because I've seen some of this AI and it's very real, it's very intense. And to know that all we have to do is just come together, and we just have to set aside our differences and be kind. And it sounds so easy, but human beings complicate everything. And so for me, as I go into my next phase of life, what I consider the back end of life, I just want to surround myself with good people. And that doesn't mean we have to agree to everything. That doesn't mean we have to be the same person. By all means, diversity and differences make people beautiful. But I would rather have people in my life that accept me for who I am, don't complicate my life, and aren't critical continuously. We have enough people in the world that bring us down and break us down. I don't need my friends to do that. I want my friends to be a sense of positivity. That's why this group has always been so important for me, because I feel like when I come here with you guys, I can geek out and nerd out about all the things that I love. I can be who I am and show you guys my latest toy. You guys are going to be like, yeah, that's awesome. You're rooting for me. And if I do something crazy, or if I have a bad idea, you're also there to set me straight and say, hey, did you think about that? Are you sure that's a good decision? And I love that. So stories like this are important because we need to not let history be part of the past. It needs to always be present so we don't repeat. But we also need to be cognizant about how we share those stories. We need to add human elements to them, because I think that by doing that, and I think that's why this story was so important for me, because not only are there portions of it that are sharing historical documentation that I've been very accustomed to, but I'm also seeing a relationship between a father and a son, between a husband and a wife, between a mother and a child. And you're seeing all of these different elements, how it affected them at different points in this course of history, and just how they went from being very normal and having a day-to-day to just being completely ripped out from everything that they knew, and everything that they had was ripped out from underneath them. And then how do you make it? How do you survive? And then how do you come out of the other side of that? So it's beautiful, it's heartbreaking, it's heartwarming, but I'm so glad I went through this experience because it was a great journey.
Yeah, I think just a little off topic. You mentioned AI, and you mentioned how horrible the human race can be, and I think that goes hand in hand. I mean, it's like I think all the people that created AI must have watched Terminator 2, God knows how many times, and yet they still wanted to do it. I'm like, this is the human race, people. But enough about
And
that.
don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to it. I think it can
I,
do amazing things. I just think that what I've seen lately is headed in a very dark direction.
I agree.
It's
I agree.
it's very scary, because I remember them talking about AI when we were kids, and that it was possible, and that at some point we were going to see this technology that was entering our classrooms. I saw a computer for the first time in the 3rd grade, and I was just like, what is that box? And I remember
I'm concerned I'm
programming.
still going to end up as a AA battery at this point in time. I can feel it. But
No, but
anyway,
I do think it's amazing, but I just think we need to be very careful on how much light we give something that could potentially erase humanity. We already are so involved in our phones and our devices, and so disconnected. We're the most connected, disconnected society in history. That is so scary.
social media has made us so antisocial. It's crazy.
But in all fairness, though, I mean, it's been scientifically proven that your attention span is shortened by the amount of time that you spend on these devices. So that explains why I don't read the same way that I used to. Your retention is far less. And then also, we forget how to engage with one another. I couldn't tell you how many times I'm just happy to have lunch with somebody and not spit on myself while we're engaging in the social construct, because it's like, I don't do this the way that I used to. It's like, wow, cool. And then I feel so overwhelmed sometimes when I'm with people because I'm like, God, I must be so much for some people because I don't really hang out with people. And when I do, it's like, oh my God, let me vomit everything that I've done for the last 5 years and tell you all about it. And you're going to be excited, right?
Well,
It's like,
well,
no, it takes a very special person to be friends with me
yeah.
because I have a lot.
In regards to the other thing about Art Spiegelman about Mouse that I truthfully love, I mean, besides the fact that he decided to make a comic in black and white, that's always something that's very bold to do. And it's also really funny because it's not just in comic books, it's also in movies. Like when in the modern day, when someone decides they want to make their movie black and white, like when you think of movies like Kevin Smith's Clerks or Tim Burton's Ed Wood, they stand out because
Mhm.
of the fact that they are what they are. I mean, sure, I can mention Schindler's List as well, which is very much appropriate for this discussion, but I think that movie was black and white for certain additional reasons. I don't think it was just
Mhm.
to be stand out and bold.
Yeah.
Um, but I think another thing that I really like about Mouse is this book came out at the best time that it possibly could have. It came out in a time where comics were actually going back to their darker roots, and we had seen creators like Alan Moore and Frank Miller. These were people that were bringing comics back to those older, earlier comic books. And I think something that I really, really liked, and I wouldn't, and if I ever got a chance to ask Art Spiegelman about it, like, were you inspired by Alan Moore's Watchmen when you had those pages at the end of volume 1 of Art looking at the comic book that his dad kept? Because
Mhm.
in the whole concept of Watchmen, they basically said, well, we're in a world where superheroes run around. What are actually in the pages of those comic books?
Mhm.
So I love the fact that when Art is shown the comic book, like, what does a comic book about the Holocaust look like when all the Jewish people in the book are mice? And I found that to be a true, it's unique and ingenious in its own way. But I really want to know if he was inspired by Alan Moore's Watchmen when he put that part of the book together. I thought that was really, really powerful. And I think, what did you guys think about the ending? I'm just curious because I loved the part towards the end of the book when Vladik is showing Art pictures of his family members. And it's a very small piece because at that point in time, the story of him of Vladik surviving the Holocaust is over. But it's actually a very important thing because, like most people who survived the Holocaust, pictures like those were very important to show the family, to show them that even after the darkest time in our history, in modern history, in Jewish history, whatever history you want to refer to it as, in the end, the Jewish people still survived. And when they were able to survive, they went back to continuing to flourish and lead good lives. And you saw the fact that he had family members, you saw through the photos, family members that were taking pictures from all over the world. He saw people who were living in other states in the United States. He saw cousins that were living in Tel Aviv. So I found that really heartwarming, as most people who are descendants of survivors do feel, knowing that even though we suffered this point in time, we still managed to find a way to come out of that darkness. And when we finally got to that light at the end of the tunnel, we tried to rebuild our lives as best as possible.
I thought it was also very powerful that he put a picture of his brother in there, not
Yeah.
having a relationship with him, never knowing him. I think it was a nod to his father. I think it was respect to his parents that this child existed. Unfortunately, he didn't know this boy, but he's part of their story. And that speaks volumes for his character. And then to share a photo of his father in the end was also very powerful, because it kind of put us in that place where he was in that moment in history, because we see him as this aging, not in great health, older man throughout the entire tale. And then you get to the end and you see him at his best. Well, I mean, granted, he had definitely been through a gamut at that point, but I mean, he's still very healthy and very young. And it really kind of sets your brain into a different turning point, because then you're starting to think about all the characters that you had been introduced to and what they may have looked like in that time. And I absolutely, this is probably one of the reasons why I love history so much. I love going back to photos of yesteryear and looking at the clothing and just the engagement of people, what they were doing, what they were eating, what they were wearing, just the types of activities they did with each other. Pictures, as they say, speak 1,000 words. And so to share those precious moments and those intimate moments that he didn't have to do for us as his audience was very special and very much appreciated.
Shae?
Well, I just keep thinking, yes, people did physically survive the Holocaust, but emotionally, did they really survive? Because in a lot of ways, it feels like Art's father didn't. Like
Yeah.
he clearly lost a part of himself in what happened. Not only losing his child, the sibling that Art never knew, but there were little things said throughout the course of the story, little things in the way he lived his life that were results of the war. And those were clearly like mental and emotional things. And so, in a lot of ways, you can't survive this kind of trauma. You can physically survive it, but emotionally, you change and you'll never be the same person again. So, it changes the course of your life just like any trauma does. And I think that Art did a really good job of showing that in a way that wasn't like, oh, no one could live a good life just because they lived through this. Because clearly his father did. But it's one of those things where you can see how it changed the course of his life
Yeah.
in, in a not great way, I could say. Like,
I
you
mean,
know,
yeah, I mean, I wonder what he would have been like if Anya hadn't committed suicide in 1968. I think that
right.
was one of the, and I think that was probably like, it's not mentioned a lot in the book,
No.
but
Because
it
that's not something he could process.
because
Like,
but that's what's
clearly
so
losing his
interesting.
wife was another trauma that again shifted his life, which led him to Mala and everything there. And, clearly that relationship was toxic for both of them.
Well,
Yeah.
even the
Well,
decision to go to Hungary, had they not chosen to go to Hungary, they wouldn't have probably gone to Auschwitz. I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, I think that they would have survived in the house with that lady. And because they does allude to who he put in his place survived. They got through the war. And so, no, it might have not been a pretty thing. They probably still would have been in hiding until everything cleared up there, but it would have been a very different experience, thus maybe changing the outcome of maybe she wouldn't have made the decision. I mean, she was very withdrawn for a number of reasons, and you saw that really after the birth of her child. I really think she had postpartum depression, and that of course was something that was not discussed in that time period. However, it could have still ended the same way. Who knows? We really don't know all the things that were troubling her. I do feel though, like you're saying, that there is a lot of suppression of the trauma. And I think that is how generations before us were raised. You don't talk about your trauma. You don't bring it to the forefront. You went through it. You survived it. Get over it. Shut up and move on. Live the good life. You're blessed. You've got, things in front of you that other people don't. You just do. And I see that with people around me in my own life, that I know have gone through traumatic things, yet they never talk about it. They do have effects because you do see it come out in their personality or decisions that they make in other areas, but it's not something that they discuss. They don't go to therapy and all of these things. now in the society that we live in, we're trying to encourage people, don't live with your trauma, talk about it, go seek help, go, talk to somebody, so that way you do have a chance at maybe having a better life. But even that, do you ever, even talking about it, still truly recover? And are you ever going to be the version of yourself that you would have been before? Your trauma shapes you, it changes you, it will forever change then the course of your existence. And as they say, things happen to you that do shape your life. And I've said many times, I've done things or said things or been a part of things that I wouldn't change, because it has made me the person that I am today. That doesn't necessarily mean I walked proud in that moment, or that I was happy with what I was partaking in, or whatever the case may be, but it made me who I am today. And maybe this is who I'm supposed to be. I don't know. It's weird to talk about things like that, because we all process it so differently. And again, this is a huge conversation that is very difficult to have in our society, because we all have so many different formulated and set opinions about mental health and trauma and victims and victimization, and what is appropriate to share and not share. And there's so much shaming that goes behind all of that too, that it's so challenging to have a healthy conversation. So any way that
So
someone chooses to share a story, I just kind of absorb it for what it is, and then I formulate my own opinions based on my own experiences. And I think that's what I did with this story.
see, the thing I love the most about the conversations that we have here is that we really don't necessarily focus entirely on the story, because at the end of the day, guys, this segment is called Must Be Read. We want you guys to read this book, so we don't want to really just talk about the book cover to cover. But I want to ask you both a very interesting question. So this is not the question, but it's a question before the actual question. Do you recall a magazine called Wizard?
No.
Okay, so Wizard magazine, back in the 90s, going into the early 2000s, was the comic book price guide.
Okay.
It was a great little magazine. I had a subscription to it. You would see everything from fake movie castings to entertainment news, like new action figures that are coming out from various companies. So I threw out all my Wizard magazines except for three. Two of them because of the fact that the covers were done by Alex Ross. Cammie, you are very familiar with Alex Ross as well. As a matter of fact, one of the covers that I kept is the very first time that Alex Ross ever drew Wolverine. So that was pretty cool to have.
That is cool.
But the last issue of Wizard that I ever purchased, it wasn't part of my subscription, by the way. I just randomly picked one up off the shelves because I wanted to say, what's been going on in Wizard lately? And who would have thought? I just had these weird pop culture things take place in my life. The last issue of Wizard that I purchased, and I still have it, I just didn't want to dig for my copies and find it because there's a lot of boxes. But that magazine specifically had the 100 greatest comic stories ever told, ranked by Wizard. So I was like, oh, it's The Dark Knight Returns, hands down. Either that or it's the Dark Phoenix saga, because I'm thinking comics, comics, comics. Wizard magazine called the #1 comic story ever told Mouse by Art Spiegelman.
I can
So
believe that.
I want to know from you both whether you, because I mean, look, Shae, I'm coming to you as someone who that reads manga. Cammie, I come to you who is venturing down dozens and dozens of comic book rabbit holes. Is this the greatest comic story ever told?
It is definitely one of the most powerful ever told. I haven't read enough to say it's the greatest. And again, so many have come out since that magazine that I'm not sure we could definitively say that today. Just because there are other very powerful pieces out there that I think we should explore on the channel, like things like They Called Us Enemy and things like that. That we could easily go down historical graphic memoirs and I would be here for it. But it's one of those things where it's definitely a piece of comic history
Yes.
and it will always be a piece of comic history. And I think it has its place in a top 100. I can't say it's number one, but I could say it's easily in the top 20.
Yeah, I would just basically say personally, it's very hard. You see, what's so interesting is like, if you ask me what my favorite movie is, I can give you my favorite movie. If you ask me what my favorite album from any band is, I can give you that definitively. Comic books, it's a little bit more difficult just because of the fact that so many different comic books tell so many different stories. But here's what I would personally say. If there was only one Holocaust story, like if the world unfortunately had the apocalypse, anyone who believes in the rapture out there, if the rapture happens and the world has to begin anew, if there is any book that depicts the Holocaust that I personally would want to survive, it would be this book.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no, and I've read many books about the Holocaust, but there is no book about the Holocaust that makes me want to revisit it, makes me want to, I mean, it's like nobody wants to, even though it's so important, nobody likes to revisit any story about the Holocaust. But this book, for me, there's just, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because of how it's palatable, as we said it earlier, or maybe it's just because of the uniqueness of the artwork. But this is a book that I will read if I want to. Like, I would be willing to pick this off of my bookshelf and read it again, because I just feel that there's so much to gain from it. Because it's, like I said earlier, it's not a history lesson about the Holocaust. It's the story about someone who is hearing about his father's life during the Holocaust. So there's so many personal things that people can take home from this story. And that's my overall attitude about it. I definitely would say that it is one of the greatest comic book stories ever told, because Cammy's going to get a laugh out of this. Right now, I'm thinking one of the greatest comic book stories I ever read is Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, and that's the story about a serial killing bear. So there's so many different stories that comics and books, but I just feel that if you ask me what my favorite book is, I'll tell you what my favorite book is. I think comics, just because of the fact that I don't know. I mean, like I group manga into this as well, because I think that manga is much more vast in storytelling than Western comics are these days. At this point, yes, there is no Western comic book that tells the story of a volleyball team. I'm sorry, there is not. But I just feel that because of the vastness in stories and how comics and graphic novels and manga just grabs the audience in a way that books just don't do. That is why Mouse is what it is. And I personally can't say it's the greatest comic book story ever told, but it definitely is one of the greatest. If I were to rank 100 comic stories, it would probably be not in my top 3, but definitely in my top 10, maybe even only my top 5.
My brain doesn't work like that. My brain works on listicles and like stories. And so for me to group in things that are unrelated, like superheroes with Mouse, is just very, it makes my brain just jitter, and it bothers me. It's like an itch that I can't scratch. So I would never generate or create a list like that. But what I would do is take books like Mouse and create a list of, say, like my top 5 historical memoirs. Like I would put this up there with John Lewis's March, which is about the civil rights movement, things that are historical.
That's another one we should break down on the channel, by the way.
Oh, highly recommend.
I haven't even heard about that.
Oh my
What?
gosh.
How have you been hiding under a rock?
Stephen, that is a collection you need to read. It is extremely powerful. And John Lewis is right in the heart of that story. So it is very important to read. And Shae, let's do it. Let's make it happen on this channel because it is such an important story to talk about. So that's how my brain works. If I was to rank Mouse, which I do think it's an important story, I do think it's an important comic book that should be documented as such in history, but I would put it or pair it with like type comics. I could not put it in the same category as say like The Long Halloween or something like that, because it's not fair to this story. It's not fair to the trueness and the true nature of this story. And it's also not fair to traditional Western comics either, you know, to somehow try to make a square peg fit in a round hole. So my brain doesn't do that. And that's the reason why. I think that when you compare apples to apples, it's a lot more of an even playing field, and it gives the stories the life that they deserve. So I, like Shae had said, there's a ton of these types of stories out there. Some are more modern, and I think they all deserve some light and some, you know, some fresh air, because much like this story, you know, I do not have a Jewish background. I don't have any Jewish family members. I have no one I knew that was involved in this time period, a survivor of the Holocaust, or even a surviving child of a Holocaust survivor. But this will always resonate and tear at my heartstrings because of how much time I devote to reading about this part of our history. So I think that can equally be said about the civil rights movement, because I have invested a lot of time in reading about those stories and the people that lived in, you know, the areas highly affected by that. I've got two bookshelves full of books about the civil rights movement. So I'm very niche when it comes to my points of history that I really love to dive into and connect with my soul. So you know, I feel that if we were to rank this, looking maybe a year ahead, if we give some life to some other stories, I think that can easily be done.
Well, I would probably say, because right now I'm noticing that my favorite comic books are all about anthropomorphic animals, so it would definitely be very high ranked in my line of that. I may just have to create a comic grouping of characters depicted in anthropomorphic animal phase. That's probably what I would have to do. But anyway, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Please leave your comments in the box below. Look, we're good people here. Please be good here. I know that, look, tensions are high right now. It's a really, really crazy world that we're living in right now, but that's really not why we made this video specifically about this book. There's other reasons, and we want people to read good stories. That's really what it's all about. Forget about the subject of the book. We're trying to get good stories out there and let you all know what are good stories to read. So we look forward to having some good intellectual conversations with you all. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. I know we've had a little bit of a slump, but listen, everybody, life's been a little bit challenging for each and every one of us.
You'll see my face more, I swear.
Oh, believe me, Shae, there's so many ideas that I have bubbling in my head, and I've been trying to get them out there, but I need my colleagues. I can't do them just with me. I need my colleagues. But thank you very much once again, everybody, and we will see you in the next one.